Welcome back. Today we are looking at Act 2 of A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare's fairy tale play. And yes, it's finally time to introduce the fairy tale plot. Act 1 was entirely set in the city of Athens in the daytime in order. But Act 2 is a descent into the night and a wandering out into the woods. And so the first thing that we need to notice is the symbolism of the woods. Woods are very often used as a trope in fairy tales, as they will be here as well. When a character wanders into the woods, something is going to happen to that character. Or rather, two somethings. Because in a fairy tale, woods are connected with the idea of magic and chaos, and their impact on main characters is twofold. Number one, they create a transformation. A character transforms from one thing to another thing. So pay attention to the way the characters are transformed in this process. And number two, there is a reversal. Characters go through a reversal of fortune when they go into the woods. Think of all the third sons or the poor soldiers in fairy tales who stumble into the woods, find some magical thing or have a magical encounter, and they come out transformed, changed, with their entire fortune reversed. That's what we're looking at in this story as well. Notice the way the characters are transformed and how their fortunes are reversed in the woods. I've also talked in the past about how Shakespeare's plays follow a certain plot structure. Act 1 tends to be exposition, whereas Act 2 is rising action. So we want to look for ways in which the conflict intensifies during this act. However, there was one special exception to that rule in this play. And that is that we did not yet finish our exposition. Shakespeare pushes part of the exposition off into Act 2, because we have to wait to introduce the fairies until we're out in the woods. Also, although we might say that the lover's plot is perhaps the most important and central to this story, the fairy tale plot has a whole lot of impact on absolutely everything. And we've saved that idea until Act 2. Shakespeare doesn't waste time in Act 2, though. He very quickly introduces characters and exposition elements so that we can begin to intensify the action. One way he does that is by establishing a whole lot of key characterization and plot points very quickly in a conversation between two characters, a fairy and Robin Goodfellow, or Puck. Out in the woods, a fairy bumps into a little hobgoblin named Robin Goodfellow, and he asks her, "Whither wander you?" To which she replies, "Over hill, over dale, through bush, through briar, over park, over pale, through flood, through fire. I do wander everywhere, swifter than the moon's sphere, and I serve the fairy queen, to dew her orbs upon the green. The cowslips tall her pensioners be, in their gold coats spots you see. Those be rubies, fairy favors, in those freckles live their savors." And so she goes around collecting dewdrops and hanging them on the flowers. Shakespeare gives us a lot of scale in this part of the story. Whenever the fairies talk, we very often see how very tiny they are. They're small enough to where this fairy's job is to hang individual dewdrops on flowers. And not only does that show us something about the fairy's size, but it also connects the fairies to nature, which is going to be a key concept throughout this book. The fairies are connected with the natural processes of the world, which means that whatever happens in fairyland is going to impact nature, which is and then going to impact humanity. We quickly establish the actual conflict in fairyland, and that is that the king and the queen are fighting. And every time they run into each other, there's a huge knockdown, drag-out fight between the two of them. And they're fighting particularly over a changeling child, a stolen child, which is a key trope in fairy tales. In older fairy stories, which tend to be a little darker than some of their more modern versions, the fairies sometimes would steal babies, and they would replace those babies with one of their own, or a creature of some kind. And the stolen baby was called a changeling because it was exchanged for whatever they put in the crib. And sometimes that thing in the crib would look like your baby, but it wouldn't be your baby. There's definitely sort of horror elements to that. Both the thing in the crib and the stolen child were at times called changelings. And so this story in part revolves around a changing child that's been stolen by the Queen of the Fairies, whose name is Titania. And now, her and the king of the fairies are arguing over this child. It's basically a custody battle. Who gets to keep the child and train him up? At first glance, it seems a little bit strange. Who really deserves to keep this child? The queen who stole him, or the king who has no real connection to him? However, we're going to make it more complicated very quickly. In any case, before we actually meet Oberon and Titania, we still have to figure out who Robin Goodfellow is. And the fairy helps us out by saying, "Hey, aren't you Robin Goodfellow?" And then she goes and lists a whole bunch of character traits of Robin Goodfellow. Specifically, he is a trickster. He likes to play pranks on people and animals. For instance, he might hide an old woman's cup, and when she is going to take a drink, he splashes the drink all down her front. Or perhaps he transforms himself into a three-legged stool, and when a little old gossip is telling a sad story and starts to sit down on him, he vanishes, making her fall on her bum and making everyone laugh. Those are the kind of pranks he's known for. And he doesn't just do them for his own amusement, he actually does them because he is the jester for King Oberon, the king of the fairies. It might be worth comparing how we have characterized Puck, or Robin Goodfellow here, to the ways we characterize the characters in Act 1. Bottom, for instance, was characterized both through his speech and his talk about himself, but also through his reputation of his rather silly and unsophisticated friends, as well as his action of continually volunteering for different parts in the play. The other characters are developed similarly. Hermia is developed by her action of standing up for herself in the court. Lysander is developed both through the description of Aegeus of him and his own conversation with Hermia. Helena is primarily characterized by her whining, and Demetrius is characterized by his boasting and also his bad reputation. The indirect characterization of the characters in the first act gives us a chance to develop our own opinions about them, whereas Robin Goodfellow is more directly characterized by the fairy's description as well as his own description. Puck's characterization, however direct, is punctuated by a whole lot of really great and very specific examples, so we still feel like we get a good vision of his character. Plus, there are going to be plenty of instances where we see his character through action throughout the rest of the play. But just as Puck and the fairy are having a great conversation, in comes Oberon from one side of the stage, and oh no, here comes Titania from the other side, which means there's about to be a clash. We see immediately that Titania and Oberon are very angry at each other. In fact, Oberon's first words are, "Ill met by moonlight, proud Titania," instead of the traditional greeting, "Well met, good to see you, it's nice to meet up with you." He says, "Ill met." How disappointing to run into you. And Titania decides to do the cold shoulder, "I'm not even talking to you" thing. She turns around to her fairies and says, "Fairies, skip hence. I have forsworn his bed and company. I have cut him off completely." And Oberon then says, "But I am your husband, you have to listen to me." And she's like, "Well, I'm your lady, but..." And then she starts laying out all these accusations against him. And they begin to accuse each other back and forth of flirting with mortals. How serious are these accusations? Well, it's unclear. But they aren't actually the root of their conflict. It's more like when you're having an argument with someone and instead of actually addressing the problem, you bring up all kinds of things from the past. Or you stick the knife in where you know it hurts most. The cheap ways of fighting. But Titania does get to the point a moment later. She says, "These are the forgeries of jealousy." So yeah, all this accusing each other back and forth, that's just jealousy. Let's get to the heart of the matter. And she has this fantastic speech, which is a string of cause and effect. It starts with, "And never since the middle summer spring met we on hill, in dale, forest, or mead, by paved fountain or by rushy brook, or in the beached margent of the sea, to dance our ringlets to the whistling wind, but with thy brawls thou hast disturbed our sport." So every time me and my fairies, me and the girls gather together to have a dance, and we're gonna dance to the whistling wind, you show up, and we start fighting, and it ruins everything. So we haven't been able to have a good dance in a really long time. And then she's gonna start this causal chain, the cause and effect of what happens when the fairies don't dance. "Therefore, the winds, piping to us in vain, as in revenge have sucked up from the sea contagious fogs. which, falling on the land, hath every pelting river made so proud that they have overborne their continents. The ox hath therefore stretched his yoke in vain, the ploughman lost his sweat, and the green corn had rotted ere his youth attained a beard. The fold stands empty in the drowned field, and the crows are fatted with the murrian flock. The nine men's morris is filled up with mud, and the quaint mazes in the wanton green, for lack of tread, are indistinguishable. The human mortals want their winter here. No night is now with hymn or carol blessed, therefore the moon, the governess of floods, pale in her anger, washes all the air that rheumatic diseases do abound. And through this distemperature we see the seasons alter. Hoary-headed frost fall in the fresh lap of the crimson rose, and an old hime's thin and icy crown, an odorous chaplet of sweet summer buds, is as in mockery set. The spring, the summer, the chiding autumn, angry winter change their wonted liveries, and the mazed world by their increased knows now not which is which. And this same progeny of evils comes from our debate, from our dissension. We are their parents and original. So because the fairies are not dancing to the wind gets angry and it starts picking up moisture from the sea, which it then dumps on the land, which then fills the rivers to overflowing and causes flooding, which then floods all the fields, and the farmers have all their crops ruined, and they can't, their animals are drowning. Not only that, but the flooding also affects the places of entertainment. The nine men's morris is full of mud. The quaint mazes are full of mud. People can't enjoy themselves. Their food is cut off. Their entertainment is cut off. And so what happens to the people? Well, they're dispirited and unhappy, and so they're not singing hymns and carols in praise of the moon because they got nothing to be thankful for. And the moon, because she's not being praised, then gets angry and starts bringing rheumatic diseases and bad air in that causes the people to get sickly and die. And not only that, but all the seasons are completely out of whack. And so it'll seem like winter one day, and then all of a sudden it's spring, and then all of a sudden it's summer, and then all of a sudden it's winter again. It's just day by day, who knows what the weather is going to be like. And if you don't have good weather that you consistently plan on, then again, your food production is just going to go completely kaput. And then everybody's going to starve to death. Yay! And all of this stems from the argument between the fairies. We are their parents and original. We caused all of these problems, Titania says. It is quite dramatic. And although this may seem like a huge overstatement, it's a clear cause and effect chain. The fairies have disrupted the natural world, and the disruption of the natural world has disrupted the human world. And so everything is out of sorts and out of balance. We've already felt that in Act 1. Something isn't right. Things aren't in balance. And we'll continue to see that as the play goes forward, until we come to a resolution. Oberon's response seems rather stiff at first. Do you amend it then? It lies in you. Why should Titania cross her Oberon? I do but beg a little changeling boy to be my henchman. All you have to do is hand over the kid, and we can fix this. Then Titania is going to make her claim to the child. Set your heart at rest. The fairyland buys not the child of me. His mother was a votress of my order, and in the spiced Indian air by night, full often hath she gossiped by my side, and sat with me on Neptune's yellow sands, marking the embarked traders on the flood. When we have laughed to see the sails conceive and grow big-bellied with the wanton wind, which she, with pretty and with swimming gait following, her womb then rich with my young squire, would imitate, and sail upon the land to fetch me trifles and return again, as from a voyage rich with merchandise. But she, being mortal, of that boy did die. And for her sake do I rear up her boy, and for her sake I will not part with him. So, she has an actual legitimate claim on this stolen child, because she was very close with the child's mother, who died in childbirth. And therefore it makes sense that this mother would entrust her child to the Queen of the Fairies. And because of her love for the child's mother, she also loves the child and refuses to just hand him over to Oberon. Very quickly, it seems that Oberon has no claim at all. I mean, what is Oberon's claim here? In some ways, he seems kind of like a bully and a jerk throughout this play because he wants what he wants and he's just going to take it. Whereas Titania actually has a loving and kind reason for her actions. Recently, however, thanks to some conversations and comments I've received, I've begun to rethink Oberon's motive here, which in some ways allows for the rethinking of the overall plot of the story. Oberon is a father figure, and he wants to initiate the young boy. However, Titania wants to completely coddle him. This is her loving child, and she wants to keep him that way forever. And in fact, perhaps all the other distorted and warped relationships stem from the fact that this particular relationship is not right. It's clearly the conflict between Oberon and Titania that's leading to all the problems in the world, including the lovers' confusion. But what if it's actually Titania's determination not to let go of the child that's causing all of this, rather than Oberon? Perhaps the child needs to be initiated and reared by Oberon. After all, the child is a young prince, the child of a king. He's supposed to grow up to become a leader. And he needs that leadership figure to guide him in that path. This is also reinforced immediately after in the way Oberon responds to the lovers when he runs into them. We'll look at that in a moment. But whether you side with Titania and her claim versus Oberon and his claim, their conflict has led to disaster for the fairyland, for the natural world, and for humanity. Titania offers for Oberon to dance with her, but he will not until he receives the child. And so, she decides to go ahead and walk away. Oberon, determined to get what he wants, decides to send Puck on a mission to find a special flower. And he tells this story of Cupid shooting an arrow at a fair vestal throned by the west. But Cupid's arrow fails because it's quenched by the watery beams of the moon, and the imperial votress passed on in maiden meditation, fancy-free. This is very likely an anachronistic reference to Queen Elizabeth I, who, of course, very famously never married. The Virgin Queen. And again, this only can work in this kind of dreamland that isn't really ancient Greece or fairyland or anywhere else. In any case, the arrow that missed hit this flower and it changed its color, and the flower is now called Love and Idleness. And it has a special property that if dropped on the eyes of someone who's asleep, the next person that person sees when they wake, they will fall immediately in love with. And so Robin dashes off to find that flower. And Oberon muses that he will use this flower to enchant Titania in revenge for her refusing his request. However, at this point, two characters stumble onto the scene, and Oberon, who is a fairy and invisible to them, watches what happens. It's Demetrius and Helena. Helena has snitched on Hermia, of course, and Demetrius, in his anger, has chased after Hermia and Lysander. And Helena, in her despair, has chased after Demetrius. And now the two of them are running through the woods, looking for Hermia and Lysander. But as Demetrius marches through the woods trying to find Lysander, Helena's like hanging on to him and trying to follow him. And he's like, "Leave me alone! Go away! Go home!" And Helena just basically abases herself in the worst possible ways here. She's like, "I can't help it. You're like a magnet. You're just drawing me in." And when he still tries to drive her away, she starts calling herself a dog. She says, "Can I please just be your dog and follow at your heels? I just want to be your dog." That's so pathetic. Demetrius replies, "Tempt not too much the hatred of my spirit, for I am sick when I do look on thee." And Helena just is like, "And I'm sick when I look not on you." And Demetrius tries all of these ways of driving her away. He's like, you don't want to throw yourself in the arms of a strange man out in the woods. He might hurt you. And she's like, "You hurt me everywhere by being so cold and rude to me." And he basically decides to try to run faster than her, so maybe she'll get lost and get eaten by something. And as Oberon observes all of this, he sees that it is a traditional image of love in reverse. Usually it's the men pursuing the women and the women playing hard to get. But as Oberon watches this, he sees this as a distortion of the natural process of love, where men have to do the pursuit. And he feels that he needs to fix this. Again, this may reinforce the kind of meaning that we talked about earlier. where Oberon is the one trying to fix and right the world and reestablish the balance. Robin shows back up and he's got the flower, and Oberon says he's going to go enchant Titania with this flower. But because he also wants to fix the problem of the lovers, he gives Robin part of the flower, and he says, I want you to go find that Athenian guy, the guy wearing Athenian clothes, wandering around being pursued by this poor girl, and I want you to enchant him so that he will fall in love with her, so we can fix their problems. And Robin, of course, immediately obeys and dashes off. The only problem there, and I don't know if you heard it, was the fact that Robin was given instructions to anoint the eyes of someone wearing the weeds of Athens. After all, how many guys are in the woods tonight wearing Athenian clothing? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This might become complicated. In any case, we jump to scene 2, where Titania is surrounded by her fairies, and she is going to go to sleep. And so she is laying down in her bower, ready to take her rest, and she sends some of her fairy servants off to do various fairy-like jobs. And then she lays down, and she's surrounded by some of her fairies who sing her a lullaby. This is a particularly fun Shakespearean song. It's often reproduced, and it's full of lovely nature imagery and fairy-like magic. But the overall concept of the song is just that the fairies are putting a charm over this to protect Titania from harm while she sleeps. Unfortunately, the person who is coming up against her is Oberon, the king of the fairies, and this charm does not seem to have any effect on him at all. Never harm, nor spell, nor charm, come our lovely lady nigh, so good night with lullaby. And so Oberon sneaks up and puts a little drop of the flower's juice in each of Titania's eyes and says, What thou seest when thou dost wake, do it for thy true love take, love and languish for his sake. Be it ounce or cat or bear, pard or boar with bristled hair, in thy eye that shall appear when thou wakest, it is thy dear. Wake when some vile thing is near. And then he slips off. And enter Lysander and Hermia. So for the rest of this act, Titania is basically going to be sleeping on the stage while other things happen. Lysander comes in with Hermia, and they've run away together, of course, but unfortunately, they've gotten lost out here in the woods. And so, hoping that tomorrow's light will give them a better chance of finding their way out, they decide to lie down and sleep in the woods. At first, Lysander wants to snuggle up to Hermia and get close while they sleep, but Hermia's like, no, let's be modest, you sleep over there. And Lysander tries to, walk back some of his comments about snuggling and turn them into a better compliment, but she's like, thank you, I sleep over there, love you. And so the two of them fall asleep, but with some distance between the two of them. And so, when Robin Goodfellow shows up and finds the two of them sleeping a little apart from each other, he thinks, oh, hey, here's a guy wearing Athenian clothing. Must be the guy I'm looking for. And hear the maid sleeping sound on dank and dirty ground. Pretty soul, she durst not lie near this lack love, this kill courtesy. Churl, upon thy eyes I throw all the power this charm doth owe. And so, Lysander gets enchanted. And Robin dances away, but in come Demetrius and Helena again. And they've still been chasing each other, and Demetrius is still trying to get away from Helena. And he finally does dash off, and Helena, who is all winded, is standing there panting, trying to catch her breath. And she's sitting there being jealous of Hermia, who's run off and is happy with her love. And she even calls herself as ugly as a bear. It's pretty great. But just at that moment, she sees Lysander sleeping on the ground. She's like, what? What's Lysander doing here? Hey, wake up! And she wakes him up. Oops. As soon as Lysander wakes up and sees Helena, bing! He's enchanted, and he's so in love with her. And the first thing he wants to do is fight and kill Demetrius for his love, Helena. Helena is at first confused and tells him, what about Hermia? What's going on? But Lysander is like, Hermia? Ugh. Who would not change a raven for a dove? And then he says some rather funny things. He says, the will of man is by his reason swayed. And reason says you are the worthier maid. Things growing are not ripe until their season, so I, being young, till now ripe not to reason, and touching now the point of human skill, reason becomes the marshal to my will, and leads me to your eyes, where I o'erlook love stories written in love's richest book. So Lysander, being completely befuddled by magic at this point and enchanted, thinks he's finally come into reason. We see that he's just been enchanted. It's just magic working on him. And yet, in his buffoonery, he thinks that his rational mind has finally led him to the woman he truly ought to love, which is Helena. This taps into one of the themes that love is rather hilarious and fickle. And when we're in love, all the rest of our senses are really distorted. So we may think we love someone logically, but we're just caught up in a crush. We've just been enchanted. Helena begins to suspect that Lysander is just making fun of her, and she gets very angry and storms away. But Lysander decides to pursue her. Before he goes, though, he looks down and he sees Hermia, and she's like, ugh. I can't believe I used to like that thing. Gross. And then he dashes off after Helena. Hermia wakes up from a dream. She was having a nightmare that a snake crawled up on her and ate her heart while Lysander laughed at her. There's clearly some symbolic overtones to that Demetrius has now betrayed her and is running off with her best friend. She's also especially horrified to look around, calling out for help, and realize that Lysander's gone. Where did he go? He definitely wouldn't have just left me. Something must have happened to him. Oh no! And so Hermia dashes off into the woods to look for him. The end of Act 2, where the action has definitely become more complicated and more intense. All of our conflicts are rising in intensity. We'll see what happens when we finally arrive in Act 3, which in a Shakespearean play is usually the climax or turning point. And with this particular play is going to be the deepest into the woods and the darkest part of midnight. Thanks for watching! If you'd like to get some more resources on this play or other works of literature, check out my Patreon, where I've got loads of cool materials and a great community of subscribers. You can also click to subscribe on YouTube or to watch another video, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.